Next on TWiL, Dan Gillmor joins us to discuss WikiLeaks, anonymity, Flipboard, and online journalism in the law. Evan Brown and Ernie Svenson join us too, all coming up on TWiL.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Bandwidth for This Week in Law is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is TWiL, This Week in Law with Denise Howell, Episode 71, Complex, Adaptive, Unladen Swallows. Hello and welcome to This Week in Law. I'm Denise Howell, and you've tuned in for Episode 71 on July 30th, 2010. We're here today with Dan Gillmor of dangillmor.com, salon.com, the Citizen Media Law Project, and many, many other online journalistic endeavors. Dan, it's so good to have you on the show.
Good to be with you.
It's been a terrific week for things that happen at the nexus of online journalism and the law. So we're really thrilled to have your expertise to go through some of those recent issues. And joining us to do that as well is Evan Brown from Chicago, the firm of Hinshaw and Culbertson, and also the blog internetcases.com. Hi, Evan. Welcome back.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon. It's great to be back.
It's great to have you. And joining us from a hiatus from TWiL is Ernie Svenson, one of our oldest friends and panelists, oldest in terms of most valued and trusted and repeat, not necessarily in terms of age, although you are getting a little scruffy there on the chin, I see.
I know. Well, I've been moving from one place to another, as I mentioned, and so I kind of feel like I need to play the part correctly.
Yes. Definitely looks like someone in the throes of a move, and I'm always a fan of the few days growth stubble, so thanks for sporting that for us. Ernie blogs at ernietheattorney.net and practices law at Svenson Law, svensonlaw.com. So thanks so much for coming back on the show.
It's good to be here.
Okay, let's get right into it with this WikiLeaks story. And I should mention, too, that Twig earlier this week in Google had Jay Rosen on. So for folks who are interested in this WikiLeaks story, all the journalism aspects of that, we're going to delve into some of the anonymity aspects of that as well. Do check out This Week in Google with Jay Rosen and Jeff Jarvis and Leo and their panel, which was really, really good on this. I was listening to it before we got going today. So, Dan, you have posted on this at Salon. And why don't you briefly tell us, for anyone not familiar with the context, what transpired, what information was leaked out, and how did it happen?
Well, calling this one a leak is the understatement of the year, at the least. Somebody in the U.S. military or intelligence community got a lot of online or digital documents regarding the war in Afghanistan and arranged to get them to WikiLeaks, which is a organization that is essentially devoted to exposing stuff that people don't want exposed. I guess that's the easiest way, and most importantly, stuff that's controlled by the rich and the powerful and the governments, etc. So the WikiLeaks people did something very smart. They've been unhappy in the past at some of the things that they've released have not gotten a lot of publicity, traction in the wider world. So they went to I'll boil it down. They arranged with three big news organizations, the New York Times, the Guardian in London, and Der Spiegel in Germany, to have an early look at these documents, some 92,000 documents, and that they would simultaneously do journalism based on the documents, and WikiLeaks would then simultaneously post the whole thing. This turned out to be a brilliant move on WikiLeaks' part because it got an enormous amount of publicity. It showed how media savvy they really are. There's no question, it seems, about the authenticity. The questions that do come up are very broad, including, well, 92,000 is a big number, but how many million were there to choose from? Even though this is a much more nuanced look at what's going on in Afghanistan, we don't have the full picture, and we probably never will. There are lots of other issues to be thought about, but the key one here is that WikiLeaks served as both a publisher, a source, an intermediary, and all sorts of other things. And we're seeing a change in the media and journalism worlds occur because of things like this, and it's only...
Right. So WikiLeaks has been around for a while. This may be the most notorious thing that it has been involved with, but it's had its share of large headline-grabbing events associated with it. Dan, why do you think that WikiLeaks is still here? The Obama administration has gone ahead and said this was an enormous national security compromise. Clearly, the government is not happy that these documents are leaking out in this format. And I'm curious about why it's not just squelched. In your post, you mentioned that you fear that may well happen. What do you think is going on right now? Yeah, that this may be an excuse for turning the United States internet into something that more looks like the China internet.
I think people in government and corporate power in America and everywhere else they scarcely need an excuse to try and clamp down on information flow. This is something that drives them crazy. WikiLeaks has there are some ways that WikiLeaks could be stopped, but they wouldn't be easy. And the information it's hard to keep it under control once it's in digital form. And we've seen this again and again. If you recall the Abu Ghraib photos, that were a precursor to this in a sense. They made their way out. WikiLeaks is just one example, really. It's not the only one of how information is difficult to keep under control. What I think is quite likely, I'm sorry to say, is a push by government in the U.S. and elsewhere to essentially restrict what ISPs will show people, and to put some very severe penalties on in the choke points where they can actually affect things. We're increasingly in this country turning into a duopoly in any given community for internet service. That looks to me like the choke point that they're going to attack, and I'm quite afraid it might go.
Yes, I mean, we're already looking at regimes or strategies, proposals where copyright law is getting a leg up from ISPs in different places of the world, and potentially under ACTA in many places in the world, under this sort of 3 strikes kind of structure. Evan, do you think that maybe fewer than 3 strikes would be something that we'd see for ISPs in the way of making available material that is potentially jeopardizing national security?
Seems to me it would really be difficult to isolate even where those choke points are, notwithstanding the fact that we may be coming into a society where you usually see a duopoly at best, as Dan says. The problem is the innumerable copies that may be out there that could be transferred from one place to another, kind of on some kind of dark net, and it just seems like a very difficult proposition to put these choke points. And I honestly hadn't thought of it that way, and I don't as of yet share the same kind of concern that you have, Dan, that there is going to be this clamping down here. But to be honest, I guess I haven't been watching for it either. I'm just not aware of any threats like this. For there to be clamping down, at least in the United States. Clearly, we've got China and the things that China does. And, we've got copyright here with the DMCA that will terminate repeat, access to services by repeat infringers. And we've got the specter of ACTA. So my concern isn't palpable yet, just because I haven't seen any real anything coming into my backyard on all of this yet. But I'm certainly, concerned about whether I should be concerned, I guess is one way of looking at it.
A couple of good comments from the chat room. Andrew Six says, we always have IRC, that, if whatever's clamped down on, there's always going to be a route around. And also, when is WikiLeaks going to publish, from Titus, the Taliban secret papers? So yes, they need to be perhaps more neutral in the governments whose papers they're publishing. Jay Rosen called this a stateless news organization. And I personally don't know that much about, where they're located, what their agenda is, how they're probably feeling right now as they're looking at governments around the world, taking a close look at them. Ernie, if you are WikiLeaks, the person behind WikiLeaks, are you concerned right now, or are you happily holed up somewhere and feeling secure in your endeavors? Oh, are you on mute?
Right, there we go. Is that better?
Yes.
The head of WikiLeaks, and by the way, there's a great link to the New Yorker profile in Dan's article on Salon, which I read and I found it very interesting. And the founder, Julian Assange, I guess is how you pronounce his name, is a very interesting fellow. And I don't think he really worries too much about anything. I think he sees a role. He has the skill set to fulfill that role. And if he can't fulfill that role temporarily or permanently, somebody else will step in to fill that role. I mean, there are always going to be people in power who want to restrict the flow of information about things they don't want people to talk about, including just general criticism of their policies. And yet at the same time, there are always going to be people who want to thwart that effort. And I think what's changed, and what the WikiLeaks example shows us, is that the internet has created a new way for this information to be disseminated. I mean, and we've seen this before, but what's interesting with the WikiLeaks situation is that he decided to give this information to 3 news organizations to let them vet the information. And I think that it shows a keen awareness on his part that it's not just about the raw information, but also about getting publicity, getting people to, who have the ability to verify the sources and so forth, to do that. So it's interesting, and he's doing it now. WikiLeaks is doing it now. But if WikiLeaks can't, I fully expect somebody else will step into that role.
Yeah, that's sort of the thing, is that this information is coming out one way or another. And clearly there are people inside at least the U.S. government who trust the person behind WikiLeaks and are feeding him information. So he perhaps has a leg up on other distribution sources in that way. Dan, do you think that this is journalism?
It's certainly part of the journalism ecosystem. And the things that's most interesting to me about it is the notion that WikiLeaks' role is really multiple. There's many aspects of what their role was. They did what you might call the reporting function, and that is to get the documents. They are also a publisher. Mm-hmm. They are also a source. They're almost, and at the same time, for their own, for what they've done, they're their own PR agency. It's a very different world. But again, this has been creeping up on us in many ways. If you consider, as an example, take a report, any report that Human Rights Watch does, where they go out and they gather a lot of information about abuses in some part of the world. They interview people, they pull together documents, they do the whole reporting function. Then they create media that is the report itself, with video and audio and documentation, etc. Then they put it on their website, which is media, and then one of the things they also do is try to get traditional journalism organizations to pick up what they have done and to talk about it. That's not a huge difference from what WikiLeaks has done here, except they just got this massive amount of stuff and they put it up. One of the other really interesting things here, and I'm working on another posting about this, is we've seen so far mostly what these three media organizations decided was important. There's a secondary vetting of these documents going on in a huge race right now by everybody to figure out what else is there, including some things that ought to give us a little bit of pause about this, namely the fact that, if we can believe the story I saw this morning, the Taliban is going through the documents to see if they can find some of the informants to the U.S. military and intelligence people so they can go out and kill them. If that doesn't give us a little bit of pause, it should. And it should give everyone involved in this some pause. And we have a number of ethical issues to ponder in all of these things, not for the first time. And I don't want to use that as a reason to clamp down on stuff, but we have to think about it.
Obviously, there are ethical standards that apply to the journalistic profession and that were consulted and employed here by the three outlets that reported on this initially. And as you say, will also be referred to and run through the filter of people who are now trying to digest the vast volume of information that's still there. Obviously, that is one way to vet this material. But Dan, as you are, working away, trying to digest this material, if that's your job as a reporter, and you're doing that job in the United States, aren't there legal considerations as well? I mean, isn't it fairly routine for the government to come to a news organization that has information like this and say, hey, you cannot publish it because it's private and we have the authority to tell you not to do it. People's lives are at stake.
Well, the prior restraint is not something that's generally done. What has been the case often with national security issues is the government will go to a news organization and say, please don't. Please hold that, and here's why. And generally, not always. In fact, I have actually no idea. We have no idea because they probably don't tell us most of the time. So when they do hold it back, but news people don't want to see unnecessary killing and don't want to jeopardize national security any more than anybody else does. So there's probably a tendency to say, yes, some of the issues is that the government is also known to want to stop information that's perfectly harmless, and especially to stop information that's embarrassing or that shows malfeasance, just like companies want to stop that stuff. So you have to make judgment calls along the way. This is, again, we're in a very new world of understanding where this goes. And one other element of this that's not been widely remarked, the reason all those documents exist is that the military has been trying really hard internally to share knowledge, to share information and knowledge, and mainly so that other people in the military can learn from what their colleagues have been doing and the mistakes they've made, the things that they've done right. And this could be problematic in yet another way, which is that it could lead the military to say, well, we're going to just stop sharing information because it's going to get out. I don't think we want to see that happen. I think we want our people in uniform and intelligence to be using these tools to do a better job as opposed to recompartmentalizing in ways that have in the past shown to be quite damaging.
Could there be an opposite effect where this actually leads to the government wanting to take control of what information gets out and when and in what volume, and so actually may start releasing more of that information itself and attempting to control the conversation? Dan, it reminds me a tiny bit, in a terribly different context, of when we met some 8 years ago at the first D conference, and I was blogging away under no formal restriction from doing so, but the actual journalists there were contractually prohibited from doing that. So the information was coming out, and I think the folks at the Wall Street Journal who put on the conference saw that, hey, this is not a realistic framework, and we live in an age where information needs to come out in more real time. People want that information, and so they took control, and they started putting out the stuff from their super secret, important confab conference more themselves. And I wonder, if the government might try to take such an approach. What do you think?
I'm a little skeptical, and here's why. The Wall Street Journal, Walt Mossberg, Kara Swisher, who run D, have a different motivation in the world, including the fact that they're journalists. Mm-hmm. And once they realized that the policy of, no, quote, journalism from an event where that was full of people with computers who weren't, quote, journalists, close quote, who were like you posting, they immediately understood that was not going to work, and they said, so the obvious answer is we open it up. I don't think that the government, and especially the military and the intelligence people, are likely to take the same view of the information that they're generating for both practical and CYA reasons. I just don't see it, and the Obama administration has in some ways tried to open up information flow and done, I think, some exemplary things in some respects. But this administration is even more prone to attacking leakers than one's previous. And in fact, there's some evidence that there's been no administration that has been more hard line on going after people who leaked information than this one. So I'm not confident. So
do you think that there might be steps taken to control these sorts of leaks and the flow of information on the internet in general through the administration's proposal about, say, a voluntary trusted identity system? Or the mere word voluntary there, I think, maybe answers my own question. But do you think that we might see steps taken to try and have less innate anonymity as the result of these kinds of situations? Evan, what do you think about that?
I think that would be pretty optimistic, perhaps overly optimistic, to think that would have much of an effect. Because in these situations where there is the disclosure of very volatile and important information, the motivation of the disclosure is not so much tied to any kind of infamy or objective that they may have for themselves, but it's for a larger picture, a larger pursuit. I mean, from what I gather, and again, I'm open for correction on my facts here, but I mean, were they looking at somebody like a private first class? Isn't there somebody with the rank of private first class who's suspected of leaking this information here? That kind, if indeed that is true, and somebody with that rank and that kind of access, who had access to these documents, probably not with authority, disclosed them, that is in and of itself is very indicative of what the motives are behind this. And in that respect, a person acting in that manner with those objectives along that course is not going to consider himself or herself beholden to any sort of voluntary identification like this, but will be subversive because of the view that what they're doing is a larger type of thing here. I'm very skeptical of any kind of voluntary participation, having much of an effect on anonymity, because anybody who wants to remain anonymous indeed will, regardless of the circumstances.
Well, Dan, would the next step from the government here be to go straight to WikiLeaks and try and determine the anonymous sources that supplied the information? And would that be a viable legal strategy? I'll pose that, maybe not to Dan, but to the other lawyers here on the panel.
Clearly, the government's trying to find, if they haven't already, who leaked this set of documents. I don't think they're going to get very far by going to WikiLeaks, any more than they'll get very far in cases where they where there's a story in the New York Times about something that was leaked to the Times. What they can do, if it's domestic, and they have done, is to use the fact that there's no federal shield law for journalism to threaten people with contempt citations and to try and shake loose their sources. And we're going to, I won't predict this, but it seems clear that until there is such a law, there will be more and more of this in civil and criminal actions. But the asking a journalist of any sort to give up a source to whom they've promised anonymity is the surest way, if the journalist complies, to destroy that person's career. And journalists know that.
Yep. Ernie, we have a link in the show notes to a New York Times piece talking about identity trust systems and the voluntary trusted identity system that has been proposed by the government. Vint Cerf in that article talks about perhaps having some kind of ID card where all of your digital identities are contained, whether, your work identity, your online gaming identity, and would attest via some kind of, biometrics that you are who you say you are as you're engaging in these activities. Do you see these things having success and gaining traction? And what do you think the future for being able to remain anonymous is?
Well, it's complicated by the fact that the reasons for remaining anonymous vary. I went back and I read the Ninth Circuit opinion that we linked to in the show notes, which I found interesting. You got to love the plaintiff. Anonymous posters, I think, what is it called? Anonymous online speakers. So the petitioner is anonymous online speakers. And the thing, people throw the term anonymous online speakers around as though there's only one kind of anonymous speaker. And, if you want to protect the ability of people who are anonymous to reveal things that we should know about, well, then you're going to be looking at one kind of anonymous speaker, and it's usually going to involve political speech. The Ninth Circuit opinion did not involve political speech. It involved commercial speech, which has always received less protection than political speech. And in that case, the focus was on finding out if these anonymous posters were really serving the corporate interest or the commercial interest of the defendant. And, obviously the courts seemed to think they were and ruled that they shouldn't have protection. But, so that's, there's the anonymous speaker who wants to advance a commercial agenda, and there's the anonymous speaker who wants to advance a political agenda, or to make people aware of other people who are advancing a political agenda in a wrong way. And those are ends of the spectrum. So to treat all anonymous speech as though it's the same, I think, is the first trap that we tend to fall into when we talk about this.
Right. But Dan, I guess the anchors at CNN don't care too much for anonymous bloggers, as one of your colleagues at Salon recently wrote. You want to bring us up to speed on that one?
I'm so sick of the traditional media getting stuff wrong, and I'm especially sick of them being hypocrites. The CNN people who were chattering blandly about this stuff, talking about anonymous bloggers in this context, that's ridiculous on its face. First of all, because there's the case that we're talking about is we've just moved over to a different topic, which was Andrew Breitbart and Shirley Sherrod. They were talking about this Breitbart hit job on Shirley Sherrod using a very misleading video snippet. And this guy was about as far from anonymous as you can get, for the first of all. And secondly, as Glenn Greenwald documented in both furious and hilarious manner in his column, CNN and the rest of the traditional media are the most common users of anonymous sources for no good reason at all, except to put stories up in the whole world. These guys are shameless in their use of anonymous sources for no good reason, and they're now complaining about anonymous bloggers. It's I mean, hypocritical is an understatement for these guys. It makes me kind of unhappy.
Right. And is it Andrew Green? I'm not going to get his last name right. Who wrote the piece that I'm referring to about this on Salon?
Well, Alex Perrine did, and Glenn Greenwald.
Glenn Greenwald. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
He made a great point about, there are reasons to remain anonymous, and losing one's job is certainly an excellent one. And, there are all sorts of reasons why you simply cannot be, you can be a credible source and still remain anonymous, which is something that seemed to be lost in that conversation by the CNN folks.
We certainly need to preserve anonymity as a tool. That it's a very important thing to have. What I think is a kind of a cultural notion that in general, we should stand behind our own words. If we're going to participate in these conversations, we ought to stand behind who we are and what we believe, while preserving anonymity for the cases where it really matters. And it really matters a lot of times. The problem is it's so widely abused.
Mm-hmm. So let's get into that Ninth Circuit case, because it deals squarely with that issue of when we need to be able to preserve anonymity and when we do not. And in this case, they drew the line at commercial speech versus political speech or any other kind of non-commercial protected speech. Evan, you want to let us know what went on there and why it's a little bit disturbing the way this particular case came out?
This was a case involving the company formerly known as Amway. I guess it's called, or was called, Quickstar, and I guess it's gone back now to being called Amway. It's not a pyramid scheme, but whatever they call that kind of
multi-level marketing. I believe
that's
it's
called. Right. So there was a splinter faction that who were the defendants in a business torts suit, tortious interference and stuff like this. Quickstar, FKA Amway, filed suit against some of these folks, saying that they had engaged in a smear campaign online to induce people, and this is all, the allegations, to induce people to terminate their relationships with Quickstar and all of that stuff. So the matter moves along, and they got into discovery, into the deposition of one of the employees of Quickstar, or I'm sorry, of the defendants. I forget the defendant's company name, but one of the defendant's employees, and he refused to answer questions pertaining to the identity of who made certain postings online. I think there were both videos and maybe blog posts that were at issue here. And the district court, we got to the point where the district court held that, that he did not have to provide that information, that these sources could remain unknown, and by that fact, the speakers would remain anonymous. The district court applied the standards that state courts have and appellate courts have in the Cahill case from Connecticut. It was a Supreme Court case from Connecticut, very much like the Dendrite case from the appellate level in New Jersey. Both of these require a pretty strong evidentiary showing that a party seeking discovery must make before a court will order that an unknown speaker be identified. And the lower court, the district court in this Quickstar case, applied that standard and held that the identities did not need to be made. And on appeal, the Ninth Circuit reversed as to 3 of the 5 speakers, making an important distinction here that the nature of the speech was commercial, and so it wasn't entitled to the same constitutional deference as what other speech, mainly political speech, like what we saw in Cahill, and I believe the speech in Dendrite was politically motivated as well. And so in so finding that the commercial nature of the speech at issue here did not warrant as strong of constitutional protection as the district court had required, it gave rough treatment to the application of the Dendrite and Cahill standard in saying that that's too high of a standard. This notion that, for example, in Cahill, one would have to come forward with enough facts to support a motion for summary judgment before an anonymous online speaker would be unmasked. The court held in the Ninth Circuit that standard is too high when we're dealing with commercial speech here, because it is not entitled to as much of a constitutional high enough of constitutional protection. So that's in a nutshell what happened. I think that the lowest hanging fruit in terms of the problematic ruling of the aspect harkens back to something that Ernie said a moment ago. What is it really? How is it that you determine what kind of anonymous speech that it is? It's very difficult to compartmentalize discreetly into very hermetically sealed containers whether somebody is engaging in commercial speech or if it's political speech, or if it's something that's kind of in between, but speech that's just for the public good. Which you may see, speech of that nature on sites like Yelp.com or consumer, some of the other consumer sites like that. If you're just warning the public about bad service you received, is that really commercial speech, or is that something that's more in the public interest that would lie somewhere on that spectrum that Ernie laid out for us between political speech and commercial speech and everything else on there? So, though the opinion seems, like it certainly makes sense when you read it, at least from from the court's analysis, you can kind of see what they're saying. It's a little bit hard to swallow because of some of the gray areas and amorphous nature of the speech that actually may come under examination in the process of this analysis.
Right, and there's a good piece on this over at the Citizen Media Law Project that points out that under this decision, anonymous posts on any sort of critique site for services and products such as Yelp or Consumer Reports would be fair game as something that goes to the economic well-being of the entity being spoken about, and then potentially discoverable in the litigation that might ensue. So that gives me a whole lot of pause. There's a lot from a social and ethical standpoint to be said for letting those people remain anonymous. Ernie, do you think that we're going to see a wave of being able to disclose consumers' identities as this decision pans itself out?
I hope not, and I don't think that this decision necessarily paves the way for that. I think this decision, the way I read it anyway, simply affirms that commercial speech is afforded less protection. And in this case, they found that the people who were posting anonymously had a commercial interest. That was their bias. And so they allowed them to be discovered. And I wanted to go back a little bit to reemphasize something I was talking about before and pick up on what Evan said. And yes, there is a spectrum of reasons for posting anonymously, but the problem with anonymous posting is always that you don't know and you can't figure out what bias the person who's posting has. And that's important in evaluating the credibility of the information. If you can't see who's saying whatever they're saying, then you don't know. Are they saying it because they're scared to be discovered? They're a whistleblower with meaningful, good, useful information? Or are they somebody who has more venal interests and is trying to push some agenda? But all of those people, you're always biased. Even a whistleblower is biased. It's just that the whistleblower has another legitimate reason, a greater legitimate reason for wanting to remain anonymous.
Denise,
Dan,
can I
go ahead.
jump in?
Yes, please.
I think one of the things we're doing here is we're letting off the hook the people who can really police this. That is, namely, the people who are reading, the people who are the audience for this stuff. If we were all to have a kind of common cultural understanding that anonymous speech is inherently less trustworthy, that anonymous attacks on one person or another person or company or whatever, and this is my policy. If it's an anonymous personal attack or attack on some business, I don't just treat it neutrally. I sort of decide, well, until someone gives me absolute evidence that this is true, I'm going to actually disbelieve it. I'm not going to trust people who attack each other and snipe at each other from behind the bushes somewhere. I'm going to wait, and if there's evidence, that's one thing. But if someone is too much of a coward to stand behind their own words in circumstances like this, not only should I not believe them, I think I should actively disbelieve them. And I think we have to start reorienting our reading of these things in a very societal way to get to that point. That would help a lot to mitigate some of the problems that are being caused by people trusting stuff just because it's on a screen in front of them, which is just ridiculous.
Well, that sort of gets us back to the voluntary trusted identity system, or Vint Cerf's fingerprint-tied identity system, where, it's sort of a bit like a verified Twitter account. You have some sort of assurance that the person is who they say they are, and, has at least some of those reasons for suspicion taken out of play. So I guess if we move toward a world like that, where you do have this, children are raised and people's mores and values change such that you have this level of trust that exists for certain kinds of speech, but doesn't exist for anonymous speech. Is that a good or a bad thing? There is this role of anonymity that plays an important role in the news cycle. And in the being able to get out information like what we've seen here in the WikiLeaks situation. I'm not trying to squelch anonymity.
In fact, crucial that we preserve it. What I'm just hoping we will move toward is a sense that we need to preserve anonymity for when it matters. When someone's liberty or life may be at stake at the top of the list. And so I will give a little more trust, though not complete trust, to, for example, in the Burma trouble, when people were sending messages out, I gave that more credence, though not full credence, as opposed to some coward posting nasty reviews of a restaurant on a website. Why should I trust that? I have absolutely no reason to trust that. Yelp does have, for example, some they have some verified users, or at least people who log in under a persistent pseudonym, which is that's a middle ground where there's some accountability, and we're going to need a whole lot of middle grounds like this. So I'm in favor of voluntary self-identification. I'm just not in favor of mandatory self-identification, which I think would be a hugely dangerous proposal if it ever gets any traction.
Yeah, that's an important distinction to keep in mind. Well, let's talk about this Andrew Breitbart situation a little bit further. Someone who was not anonymous, as you pointed out, Dan, although I guess his original source was. Can you tell us what happened there and talk about someone losing their job? Here we go. But here it wasn't the speaker, but the one spoken about.
Well, yeah, this was a colossal fail at every level. Breitbart, and this is assuming he's been telling the truth. Let's assume that for a moment, though it's I don't take that totally for granted. He gets, according to him, he gets a video snippet of Shirley Sherrod, a agriculture department official, giving a speech to a local NAACP chapter, in which she, in this snippet, appears to have confessed to having had not just sort of anti-white, she's an African American, and that she's and was in a position to help or not help some white farmers, and she's saying how she was inclined not to help them because they were white. Well, this snippet blows up because Breitbart makes this big deal of it on his site, and then his friends in the quote conservative close quote media pursue it. Then the cowards in the agriculture department right up to the top say she's got to go before they know anything further, and they fire her. And then the NAACP jumps on the bandwagon and condemns her. And all of this before anyone does what they should have done, or not anyone, but anyone who was in a position of power here, saying, well, actually, there was more to this tape. Turns out that the video, if you saw the whole thing, was her saying that she started off with these thoughts, but in fact realized quickly that this was not the way to approach it, that in fact she needed to help these people because this was not about race, but about class and about people with power and people without power. The farmers, the white farmers she helped, actually think she's the greatest thing in the world. Anyway, so everyone has to back off eventually. The administration apologized, the NAACP apologized, Breitbart has not apologized, and it's...
and Shirley Sherrod's going to sue him.
Well, she says she is. It's going to be, we'll see what happens. As several First Amendment lawyers told me yesterday, it's not a lot of fun to be even the plaintiff in a libel suit, because everything you've done becomes fair game for the discovery process. So we'll see what's the outcome of this. But everybody in this thing, just about, with a very few exceptions, behaved terribly, except for Shirley Sherrod, who was basically torn to pieces, and my sympathy is strongly with her, no doubt about it.
Yep. Ernie, do you have any thoughts on this case and how you might see it playing out?
Yeah, it's the supreme irony to me, and I'm not surprised by much of what I see here, but it's the supreme irony being that somebody tells a story that's very personal and revelatory, and it gets videotaped, and then somebody takes that story and completely distorts it. I mean, not a little bit, like completely changes the message to the opposite of what the message was, takes out the vulnerability element, takes out everything. And then what do we learn? We learn nothing surprising. We learn that there's a 24/7 news cycle that drives, Fox to publish things that it wants to publish. Not surprising. We learn that, the Obama administration will act on a 24/7 news distortion, which actually that one is kind of surprising to me. But when you plug in the
that's the most deeply disturbing part of this to me.
Right.
Bad people are going to do bad things. And secondarily, I'm sad that the remedies available to Ms. Sherrod are as limited as they are. But for her to just not even be given the benefit of the doubt here is pretty awful. Go on.
Yeah, it's abominable. It's abominable. But it's not surprising because it's not just Obama. It's an administration. It's a political machine. So it's not surprising when you plug in the idea that there's a political component. And that also, I think, explains the NAACP's reaction, because it also failed to, do due diligence here and uncover what was really going on, or even to ask her, because she, I'm sure, could have told them or told anybody who asked, here's what really happened. But nobody did that because we live not just in a 24/7 news distortion cycle, but we live in a political reaction cycle to that same cycle created by the news. And that's what's going on. And it's what's really sad is, if you were a grade school teacher and you told your kids, read this story and tell me what it's about, and somebody comes back and tells you the opposite of the story, you're going to give them an F. And here, Fox F, Breitbart F, Obama administration F, NAACP F. But the rationale for doing this is that they need to act quickly, which means it's more important to move fast and be thoughtless than to be mindful and take your time.
Yep. I guess that's definitely where we are these days. Dan, is there any salvation ahead in the journalistic arena, or are we just in for more of the same as things continue to move at lightning speed?
Well, if Andrew Breitbart worked for any respectable news organization, his career would be over. Mm-hmm. It would be absolutely over. Not only did he do this, but he posted a correction that was an absolute ridiculous correction. It sort of semi-corrected one of the things he got wrong, but not the fundamental thing he got wrong. Anyone who worked for any responsible, honorable journalism organization would not have a job anymore and would be unemployable after this thing. Yet he still has the backing of the people who politically agree with him. He's a journalist, but he's an activist also, and he's a terrible journalist, and a pretty clever activist. That's the best I can say. Yep. What we all need to do, and I did a post about this, I don't know, last 8 or 9 months ago, was we ought to, in general, take a breath before we believe stuff that we see. This is a common failing we have. The human psychological response to things is to react quickly. We twitch before we jump before we think. And I wasn't the first to use this expression. My friend John Markoff from the New York Times probably was, but maybe we need to, on things where there's some, where there's consequences of believing something that's false quickly, that we ought to adopt a version of what others have called in the slow food thing. Well, we need slow news. We need to think for a second. We need to wait for evidence. We need to, going back to the anonymous thing, if I see something on Twitter that's fascinating, I put it in the category of, well, interesting if true. Mm-hmm. And the if true part needs to be kind of, again, part of our thinking and consumption process with news. And I think it's going to take some time before we do that. But if we don't, we're going to be wrong about increasingly consequential things where there's actual consequences to being wrong, and sometimes personal ones.
Evan, let me frame a question to you before you go on, and hopefully you can tie it together. Springing forward from what Dan was just saying, what Ernie said a moment ago, about the world where information moves fluidly and yet needs to be viewed through a critical lens, fascinating if true. Do you think that there's a role for the law in there to help guide that process? As Dan mentioned Twitter and how it's incredibly easy for misinformation to travel on that channel, simply because someone thinks it's fascinating and puts it forth as true without putting it through that filter or without putting a disclaimer, hey, who knows, but here it is. Do you think that defamation law should reach that kind of conduct? Do you think that it should impose duties on people who are knee-jerk reacting in any kind of context, even though our libel and slander cases don't tend to come up in the sort of real-time communication arena just yet?
I do have a theory that envisions a role for the law in this, and I hope that you'll be patient with me if I can try to explain it. It's one of those things that perhaps in large part has come upon me this morning thinking about these issues. I don't know so much that in this theory that I have or this construct that I have in my mind, that it's the role of defamation law that provides the legal factor, but I think it may be more in line with the principles underlying a shield law. And here's what I'm thinking. At a very high level of generality or abstraction, our civilized society is a complex adaptive system. We've got, and this is, goes all the way back to legal theorists like, John Austin back in the 1830s, the positivist notion of law. And I actually try to always get in the habit of pronouncing that positivist, because it's the notion of the laws being enacted by those in a superior position over those who are in a less politically powerful position. So in that dynamic, law in our modern civilized society governed by laws is a complex adaptive system. Norms adjust a certain way, and then the laws will adjust in response to meet those norms. And then those norms will change because of the law. And so there's this back and forth between the people who are in various positions here. In this complex adaptive system that is our modern society and civilization, governed by means of law, there are journalists who are a critical animating ingredient in all of this, because without the flow of information, how can these norms develop and the laws respond, and how do we maintain safety? How do we maintain peace? How do we progress in the arts and sciences? How do we do all the things that society does? So because of the critical role that journalists plays and the noble objective of journalism, there's got to be some rules and constraints and some kind of format that journalists should follow. And that means that, and this is where I think my theory might get controversial, and I don't even know if I believe it myself, perhaps there should be some kind of banner under which a journalist who is, under which a journalist, undertaking this role should, a banner that he or she should carry. And there should be a difference between real journalists and non-journalists, so that this activity is done according to rules, according to the way things ought to be done for the progress of our society. And here's where then the shield laws could apply. We make sure that those who are journalists, who abide by these rules, who have the highest ethics, who follow all the rules that they learn in J school and all that stuff, they get those protections. and those who don't. And therefore, we see this enterprise of journalism going in a way that's beneficial and plays an appropriate role maintaining the equilibrium in this complex adaptive system that I'm envisioning in my head. So that's where the law comes in to balance that and add that equilibrium.
Mm-hmm. So
the sound you hear is me screaming in opposite.
Well, you've spent a lot more time thinking about these things, so I can't wait to hear.
I'm up until the point that you said who gets the protections and who doesn't, I was certainly with you, and it was, if people want to put a tag on their blog or whatever they have, that here are the principles to which I subscribe and that I will follow, and here's what I'll do, fine. The minute we get into codifying it and to offering protections to some and not others based on who they are and what they say they're going to do, we're in trouble there, I'm afraid. Part for two reasons. One is that the protection should go to journalism, not the people we call journalists. And
that's what I was going to say, is it takes your acts of journalism distinction out of play.
Yeah, and this has been, I think a lot of folks have talked about this. The other is that I'm afraid, and history seems to be a pretty good guide on this, that what you're suggesting inevitably leads to a licensing system where the government, people in authority, decide who we call the journalist to get this protection, and I will, at the top of my lungs, oppose something like that, because it's dangerous. And in a world with anyone being able to create and post media, the act of journalism in a journalism ecosystem that is incredibly diverse, and where someone who is not typically a journalist can commit a random act of journalism at any time, the need to protect that is, to me, much more important than I think seductive simplicity of providing protection to some but not others. I would be quite opposed.
Yeah, I hear you for sure. And are there certain aspects of an ethos, though, that should be the standard being met, regardless of who someone is, i.e. a journalist or not a journalist, but based on the activity that they're undertaking? Isn't there a uniform set of principles and expectations that we
Something
could
like,
have of these people?
You're there, you're observing, you're not employed by the people you're observing, that kind of thing?
Well, but apart from the question of whether one qualifies as an entity engaged in a journalistic activity, some kind of norm that lays down on top of them and expectations as to how they're going to report and interject their feelings or sentiments about it, and not not put a spin on it.
Well, it would be nice if there was, but there are certain principles of journalism that are pretty commonly applied and that we all agree on, like thoroughness, accuracy, fairness, independence, which is a tricky word, and in a new world that we're in, the one that I'm thinking is becoming equally important to all the rest of them is transparency. We have a long history around the world and in America of advocacy journalism. Journalism done by people who wanted to make a point or to change something or to expose something. They had a very clear point of view. They told us what it was, and the journalism they did was spectacular and important, going back to, before her, but Ida Tarbell and others. The the problem with the standards having some resonance of what we think of as, quote, objective, close quote, journalism, which is impossible, it leaves out a whole huge category of what goes on, including the fact that someone who gets the picture of some newsworthy thing, who may have a stake in the outcome, if we understand that, we can refract that through through a sort of mental lens to get a sense of whether we should trust it or not, and whether there's more evidence, and on and on. It was easier to do what you're suggesting when the number of news media outlets was so small. It's impossible to do when the ecosystem is so diverse and so complex, and getting more so every day. But we do need to encourage people to be transparent about their worldview as they provide information to the rest of us, and then we start making more intelligent decisions on what to trust and what not.
Yeah.
Dan, speaking of transparency in the journalistic field itself, I just wonder if you have any quick comments on this JournoList that also came out this week. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I take it for what it's worth, because I was never a part of it, and I haven't seen the full archives. This was a list of generally liberal, left of center, self-identified journalists, and including some people who would call themselves straight reporters, some who would call themselves commentators with a point of view, and somebody.
It was an email list, right?
Yeah, email.
Something like a Google group.
Yeah, a several hundred member email list, and there it was supposedly off the record, which is the most ridiculous concept I have ever heard. There is no such thing as an off the record listserv.
Especially amongst a bunch of journalists.
Well, you can all agree that it's off the record, but it's not. It's going to get out. And the idea that supposedly intelligent, savvy journalists, anybody on that list could have ever believed that what they were saying was going to remain private, I would be really hard-pressed to employ somebody who actually believed that, because it would show to me they have absolutely no idea what the real world is. So anyway, so some of this stuff's getting out, but being made into a ridiculous, it's a bogus scandal, because the excerpts that we've been seeing, again on a conservative blog, are essentially showing that people who had identified themselves publicly as liberals, like commentators, were saying liberal things to each other, and left-wing things to each other, or biased things to each other. Well, big shock there, I don't get it. And meanwhile, the people on the right who are in the journalistic community, who are wailing about this and saying, oh, this is terrible, who have incredible amount of connections to the Republican Party and the conservatives, and don't see any hypocrisy there. They're just unbelievable to me.
Mm-hmm. Sort of unfortunate that it happened in the same week as the WikiLeaks unfolding drama. I guess it shows that journalists aren't immune to their own leaks from within their organizations or their loosely joined confederacies of fellow colleagues.
Yeah. Jim Fallows,
die by the leak.
Well, Jim Fallows at The Atlantic did a great blog post on listservs and the utter absurdity of thinking that they're off the record for all time, because by definition it's not.
Right. So, Evan, on the topic of being complex and adaptive, another thing that happened recently is this very cool, fun-to-use app called Flipboard that they talked about on TWiL last Sunday, and I've been looking at since, because I said this on TWiL briefly, I jumped on the show, that it really raises some interesting questions about copyright law and what browsers can do and what applications can do. Have you played around with this? And we've talked about RSS and licensing and what you can do with RSS before on the show, and this is more of sort of a scraping scenario. But over on our Facebook page, Dwight Spitz had the comment that, it really probably doesn't matter that much how you're getting the material, if it's scraped, if it's coming in from RSS. Do you think people really care about that? The end user certainly doesn't. The impact is the same, however it's coming in. And what you're getting here is a reuse of the work in a really nicely packaged way. Right now, it seems to be non-commercial. There are no ads. The app is free, but there's no guarantee that will continue. What are your thoughts on this thing? And then maybe we can go to Dan for how it relates to shifting and revolutionary things in the field of journalism in general.
Right.
Evan?
I haven't played around with it, so there's one technological clarification that I want to get. What it does, it will take like some kind of social stream, like a Twitter feed or Facebook news feed or something like that, and it will kind of go out and automatically get the content that is located at the links located in those particular items within the feed. Isn't that right? Isn't that what it does technologically?
It displays things. I think it scrapes to begin with, and then it displays things in a very nice newspaper kind of layout, and it caches the entire source site in the background. It displays things partially, and then when you want to see the whole thing, you click on it, and you can immediately see in an in-app browser the source.
Right. Then I understand how it works. And I think, unfortunately, if there's going to be a copyright brouhaha on this, it's going to be one of those things that's a pretty technical copyright argument where, yes, maybe a couple of points along the way, maybe on the server or, in some cache somewhere, there's another copy made that's additional to the one that would be made if you were to actually just be looking at the feed. Not an RSS feed, I'm aware of that, but then clicking through and seeing it and bringing it up in a regular browser. When we look at it and just consider at the at the first blush kind of level, people are just consuming the same kind of content that they would see if they were to click through these, and so the net total of information going into your mind from the experience of looking at this feed or these feeds is the same. It's just that the expressive content has been manipulated in a certain way that makes it different, and unfortunately, it looks like it has a couple of weak spots there where there could be some copyright problems. But I hope that it doesn't really come into anything of a significant dispute, and maybe that can kind of just agree to some kind of truce among the world of the publishers. I mean, that's being kind of pie in the sky, thinking that there could be any kind of agreement of everybody here. But hopefully, it's going to be one of those things which realize that it's not harmful to any monetary interests going on here, really.
Yeah, I mean, one of two things could happen, or maybe one of three things. The third of which being it could be squelched under existing copyright law. I was thinking there might be some kind of middle ground where this is examined and seen to be something that's really new, that doesn't fit within existing copyright law, and maybe there should be some kind of exception carved out so that this kind of an application can exist. Or, as you say, there could be some sort of behind-the-scene brokered arrangement where the law doesn't get involved at all. So we'll just have to see how it plays out. But Dan, how do you think it plays out in as far as being a very nice way to get journalism into the hands of readers and viewers?
We're seeing so many interesting developments in the in people using RSS and other scraping technologies. There's a question about, as we've been hearing, about whether fair use applies to some of the stuff that's going on. But in general, I'm on the side of when it gets to my computer, I should be able to do what I want with it. And if someone is making available things in a way that like a full text RSS, that's pretty clear cut to me that I should be able to put it into a reader. The issue is when people are scraping whole web pages and doing some of this other stuff. I'm not sure how to approach it. Maybe we need an equivalent of robots.txt that for different kinds of readers that says with different gradations, like do what you want, but in other cases, no, don't do that. And clearly, some of these things are going to be found to violate fair use, and I'm a big fan of in non-abusive ways, and we're going to be seeing tests of some of these. But I'd rather see more experiments and people who are doing these kinds of aggregators need to understand that if they're going to make money off of other people's work, that there's going to be some pushback on that unless they share the revenue.
Right. Ernie, any thoughts on Flipboard before we get to our tip and resources of the week?
Well, I guess, picking up on the last point that Dan made, I guess I agree, which I agree with. If people are going to make money on other people's work, then, they should be paid, or there should be some, principal control for the first mover. But the question is, a lot of these technologies occur when people aren't making money. Like, in the case of Twitter, which is being rerouted into Flipboard, Twitter hasn't quite figured out how to make money yet. So, that's where the tension is going to be, and that's where the battle is going to be fought, because we all want these innovative technologies to emerge. And at the same time, I think most of us recognize that it's important for people who spend a lot of time putting things together that we all enjoy to be compensated. Otherwise, we're not going to see more of those sorts of things being developed. But the tension is who gets paid. And I think that the problem with the RSS and the scraping and just in general the world that we live in, because it's so easy to route digital bits around, is we tend to take first and ask questions later. That's kind of the MO for most people these days. And that's where the tension is, because the people who create this stuff, want to control that or prohibit it or condemn it. And the people who want to use it just say, well, it's on my computer. I should be able to do whatever I want to with it.
All right. So our tip of the week this week is that you shouldn't make offers online or otherwise in a public forum that you don't intend to keep. And we have a couple of stories on that front. One is a pretty humorous one involving a law student who is attempting to cash in on $1 million offer that an attorney named James Cheney Mason made when he was appearing on Dateline NBC. He is a criminal lawyer, and his client apparently was found to have maneuvered his way through the busiest airport in the world and made it to a motel in under 30 minutes. And he thought this pretty outrageous, and he said that it couldn't happen, it didn't happen, and basically, made this challenge. A law student in Texas took him at his words. He said he would pay $1 million to someone who could demonstrate that this could occur. So the law student went ahead and orchestrated this whole scenario where he reenacted this route where he got from the airport to the hotel and did it within the time frame and then demanded his $1 million. So he, the attorney, of course, said no, and now the law student is suing. And so the companion story in the news to this is Toshiba, in connection with the World Cup, made a bunch of offers to people in various countries with soccer teams that if their team won, their Toshiba product that they purchased, their laptop, or I believe it applied to televisions too, would be free, but there were all kinds of strings and contingencies that weren't made very prominent in that offer, where you had to go online and register, et cetera, et cetera. So it brings us back to classic 1L contract law, when you're making sort of a grandiose offer in public, when those sorts of things can be cashed in on. But I think the tip we can take away from this is you just shouldn't be making those offers at all, unless you intend to carry them out in the way that one would reasonably interpret from what you've said. You're going to carry them out. Let's see, Ernie, any thoughts on these two particular cases?
Yes, it's always dangerous to tempt law students. They have lots of free time and they're very motivated.
Yes. Evan?
There's all kinds of stuff to talk about on this. It's interesting. I think you were talking about one of the conditions that you needed to meet before you could qualify for the free Toshiba, and I think one of them was you have to go to the website and answer 3 questions. I didn't look into any research of what those 3 questions were, but I bet they were: what is your name, what is your quest, and what is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow? These are really neat, and I can differentiate them too. I think pretty easily, and that is worth discussing a little bit. With the Toshiba stuff, with the World Cup soccer stuff, that was an advertisement, and that's where most of these kinds of disputes arise. The guy going on Dateline and saying $1 million, that's a little bit more interesting there, because that's not an advertisement. So is that the courts looked at these? Are these actually offers to contract, or are they mere invitations to make an offer? So that it's a little bit more interesting in that situation. But then, if we're talking this in the nomenclature of contracts 101 or 1L contracts, what is the consideration for this guy? This defense lawyer going on TV, why would he want to enter into a contract with somebody just to prove his client guilty? It doesn't seem like he's getting much out of that bargain. So pretty funny stuff here.
Yes. All right. And I have not 1, not 2, but 3 resources of the week for you all, because they're all just so good and I couldn't leave any of them alone. One of them comes to us from Bob Ambrogi, highlighted this on his blog, and it's very topical for what we discussed today. It is the Suffolk Media Law newsletter. You can get to it at suffolkmedialaw.com/newsletter, and it's an email newsletter written by media law students, touching on all the kinds of issues we discussed today and more. Looks really good. I signed up for it. Also, there's a great blog out there also covering these sorts of issues and policy issues at the intersection of technology and law in Washington, and it's called humorously enough, Silicon Valley. So go check out the Silicon Valley blog. Their top story right now, let me pull it up, is that such things like copyright crusaders accused of stealing code. The U.S. Copyright Group, who we've talked about before, going after BitTorrent downloaders, is now being said to have lifted the code for their own site directly from another site without authorization, etc. So they have some great stories over there at Silicon Valley. And then finally, again on the topic of transparency and things getting out, a lot of companies either have their social media policy available freely on the web, or someone has gotten it out there for them with or without their consent. And lots of them are available for review and comparison. There are a couple of links in our show notes, which you can find at delicious.com/thisweekinlaw/71. Over there at, let's see, Fast Company, they've been covering this, but the ones I highlighted here are a post from Social Media Today, social media employee policy examples from over 100 organizations, which is a great resource. And then another one, more social media policies, and this one is from Fast Company. So they've been putting up a bunch of those. I think they have a 2-part article where you can go check out the LA Times social media policy, the Australia Public Broadcasting Network, ABC Australia's Cisco's, American Red Crosses, and a number of others. So those are great resources to have on hand. Should you need to draft or compare your social media policy to another one. So any thoughts there on our resources real quick, or on anything else we discussed during the show, Dan?
No, just a lot of fun joining you all. This is great information I'm learning from the others. I caution that I'm not a lawyer, but I came very close to going to law school, but escaped with my life.
Well, the legal profession missed a great opportunity there, but we're very thankful for all your contributions in the profession of your choice. Thank you so much, Dan Gillmor, for joining us today on TWiL. I'm really enjoying your new Salon column. It's great that you're writing there. And, of course, everything else you do.
Thanks. That's very kind of you.
And, of course, you can follow Dan on Twitter. He's at Dan Gillmor there, and always gets into rousing discussions on Twitter. I love how you use your Twitter feed, Dan.
Thanks.
All right. So also with us, Evan, thank you so much joining us again. Folks can follow Evan on Twitter at Internet Cases, and really appreciated your contributions today.
It was a great time, and Dan, it was an honor to meet you. I've been a reader and a fan of yours for many years. So great we could. I'm really glad we could talk. Thanks.
We'll do it again.
Great.
Absolutely, Dan. You have an open invitation. I know you have a busy schedule, but we'd love to have you back on the show whenever you can see your way clear to doing it. And Ernie, the attorney, Ernie Svenson, thanks so much for coming back.
It's great to be back, and it was great to hang out with Dan once again. I think the last time I saw Dan, he was in New Orleans, and we went to a nice restaurant and had some barbecued shrimp. So hopefully he'll come back lured by the smell of the barbecued shrimp and the great time he had before.
Well, and cooking over an oil flame.
Yes, that's the new recipe.
All right. And hopefully there were no unladen swallows harmed in the cooking of your shrimp. Also, we've done our part here in discussing anonymity today to ensuring the Earth's anonymity in the universal scheme of things. I was reflecting that this show was made without use of any broadcast television or radio waves. So we're, as far as the rest of the universe is concerned, we're here in stealth mode on Earth. You're listening to TWiL. So if you are listening, thanks so much for joining us. And you can listen live every Friday at 11 at live.twit.tv, where you can watch the video as we record. The Twit shows then go up on YouTube afterwards. You can find them at youtube.com/twit. And there's a show note or a playlist for This Week in Law. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week for episode 72. Take care.